Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Words of Heart. In today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking with Claire Moorcraft. Is that correct?
Moorcraft, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Awesome. First time I said the guest name right. Woohoo! Thank you for joining me today, Claire.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Claire, if you could tell my audience a bit about yourself, that would be great.
So my name is Claire Moorcraft. I am an ease expert. So I help take women who are like struggling in tension and in a lot of pain into be able to having like a life filled like with ease and pleasure. I am 41 and yeah, so that's how I kind of work with women at the moment. Mainly work with women, some men, but mainly women. And so I guess I kind of like coming on these platforms to tell like a little bit of my story. It's quite a there's a lot to my story, so I will kind of keep it brief, and then you can kind of chime in with anything that you kind of want to dive sort of deeper into it. So I've got like a bit of a traditional background, like I was a scientist in the pharmaceutical industry, and then I spent like 10 years working in corporate sales. And on the outside of things, I had this amazing life. I was earning six figures in London. I lived in a beautiful area. I had lots of friends, but like underneath it all, I had an eating disorder, and I also had an exercise addiction. And eventually I developed fibromyalgia and chronic pain in my whole torso from over exercising and having an injury. And so like I was in pain for a really long time, and eventually I had to give up my job, and because I just couldn't cope with the pain anymore. And like my life, it's like living a double life. My double life was kind of catching up with me, and the facade that I put on to the world, because I present well, like no one ever really knew what was going on behind the scenes, but I was very isolated and never really spoke to anyone or talked to anyone about it, because like eating disorders, addictions and self-harm behaviors carry an awful lot of shame and stuff. And who do you go and talk to about these kind of things, or where do you even get help? So I ended up doing a plant medicine ceremony, and I won't go into too many details because it's a little controversial these days. And I got shown the tarot card, the Tower. Have you ever seen that before?
Mhm.
It's like a picture of a tower and everything kind of crumbles. And then I thought, like I was like, oh dear, I had this feeling like everything would kind of be stripped away from my life. And that's how some of the plant medicines work. They take away everything that's not you. So I embarked on this like healing journey where I got the message, like it literally was like, stop messing around with your life, quit London, leave your job, go off and do this shamanic training, which I wanted to do when I was like 26. But I heard the call, but I listened to my parents. I was like Joseph Campbell's advice of like, never do what your daddy says. He's only interested in your safety. And I wish I'd known that when I was younger, because I definitely would have done my shamanic training 10 years earlier and not waited till it spat me out with like a chronic illness that Western medicine couldn't heal or couldn't make any difference in. And so I went off and I did my shamanic training, and then it was just been a journey of unfolding, really, more of a stripping away of everything and kind of discovering what was going on inside of myself. And as part of that, I retrained as a sex and pleasure coach, because finding pleasure in my own body was one of the ways that I really found help to manage the fibromyalgia and kind of change my relationship to my body as well, from one of like abuse and self-harm and self-hatred into one of much more like acceptance and kindness and gentleness. And it's weird, like my body is probably in the worst shape it's ever been, like physically and stuff, but I feel like the most sort of self-love towards myself than I ever have done in my life. I was like, wow, I wish I'd known all of this when I was younger. But it's been a journey of kind of self-discovery, and one of putting all of the pieces together in my life. And what I hadn't realized, that had been diagnosed with complex PTSD, because I just thought my childhood was really normal. And it was only when I found out afterwards that actually there's an awful lot of trauma in my history, and all of the exercise addictions, the fibromyalgia, the depression, the suicide attempts, the self-harm, all of these pieces were all a result of childhood trauma that I just suppressed and buried in my body. And it was coming out in the form of physical symptoms because I just couldn't deal with the emotional side of stuff. I just buried it kind of so deep inside of myself that I didn't even know it was there. So that was how my body was telling me there were things inside of myself that weren't well. And it kind of explains a lot of why my life had been until I started to kind of really deal with these feelings inside of myself. It's been like really difficult. My life was like one of like constant stressing, constant pushing, do. I was always a top sales rep and high pressure, top of my year at university, got a first, all of these kind of things. But it didn't come from a place of internal happiness. It came from a place of, I'm really not good enough and I need to prove my worth and I need to prove that I am something in the world by being like successful, whatever that means.
First off, I'm really glad you shared your story with me and my audience. I can't imagine what you have divulged to me just now. I can't fathom how that over time eternally affected you. In regards to the diagnosis and health condition and eating and everything, and not knowing what on earth your body is doing to you, I can relate to that a bit. I got diagnosed with diabetes at the start of the pandemic last year, January 2020. Heck of a year to have any type of health diagnosis. But prior to being diagnosed, I had no idea what was going on with my body. I didn't know symptoms of diabetes. As far as I knew at the time, I had no history of diabetes on either side of my family. So I don't know how much you know about diabetes, but I'll do my best to educate you a little bit as far as my own personal experience. I couldn't keep anything down. I would eat something and then I would be full or throw up, usually both, which was really saddening and disheartening, but my body was basically eating itself from the inside out. I think that there's a scientific term called psychosis or I don't know what the right terminology in regards to that, but it was probably the most depressing and terrifying time of my life. I had just turned 24. All of this, leading up to obviously the whole me being sick and everything, I was losing a dangerous amount of weight, and of course there was no explanation. And then in November, it's when it progressively got worse. I had just turned 24. I was in school. Everything seemed to be going well. And I had a lot of health issues growing up right off the gate when I was born. So as far as going through any type of health condition, I completely understand that, simply because that's how my body came into the world. But in my 20s, I thought that hassle of health-related issues was really behind me, or at least pause so I can discover who I am and get a grasp on reality. But it wasn't behind me. I could have died at any given moment, which was really devastating. But I didn't die. I'm still here. I saw my diagnosis as a blessing in disguise. Many of my family had trouble processing it, considering my upbringing growing up and as many issues as I have. Oh, her life is finally together. Why did this have to happen to her? They really saw it as a curse, really. I'm sure that's really dramatic and perhaps exaggerated a bit from how I'm describing it, but they really, really hated that idea that this happened to me, because they were crying every single day, not knowing what was going on. And once they did figure out what's going on, it was like, seriously, why did this happen to her? So in regards to the whole body turning on you concept, I completely understand. Even now, it's still, though I've been diabetic for about a year now, I'm accepted that this is part of my life, and I've grown accustomed to seeing as a blessing. And it was really through my diagnosis that I went on this mantra for being a warrior for change and embracing change and all ideas of change, and really how this podcast came to be. But I will be honest, it is still hard sometimes because I went from not having any meat on my bones to now perhaps having too much meat on my bones. So it's really about managing it and not going to crazy places like, what if I don't eat this? Or perhaps I should eat this. Management is a real fundamental part to handling diabetes. I'm insulin dependent.
Okay.
So as far as diabetes and accepting it, I really had no choice because I could have died. So just to give you some insight as far as the body and how I know how it can be absolutely complicated. So
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's really quite something having, like, learning to live with a chronic illness, especially, I guess, sort of so young as well, you know. It's and it you know, for people around as well, it can be incredibly difficult, like, to watch someone that you love in so much pain and kind of really suffering. But I understand what you mean about, you know, these, like, I see the everything that's kind of happened to me. Sometimes, you know, I'm like, oh really, why did that happen, you know? But most of the time I see it as a blessing in disguise, you know. It's like it's been an opportunity to get to know who I am beyond, you know, the physical body, you know, beyond my thoughts, beyond all of the, you know, emotions that kind of arise within me. And it takes a certain kind of strength to be in the world, especially living with any sort of form of, like, physical illness. Like, people don't understand the invisibility of it and how much you have to do to just function as a, like, you know, basic functioning, of how much more effort and things it takes, and how much more you have to think about things and consider things that you wouldn't have had to do without this kind of illness. And I don't think people talk about it enough. There's a really amazing teacher called Jeff Foster, and he's going through Lyme disease at the moment. He's a beautiful writer, and he's been talking about his kind of journey with it as well. You know, it's like, I really, really want to live, but then there's also part of me that really wants to die because I don't want to live with this physical pain. And it's like, you know, you can toggle between these kind of two different places inside of yourself. But it can be a really lonely journey because, you know, how many people do you know that are going through similar things? You know, often support groups are just doom and gloom and misery, so I kind of have tended to stay out of them.
right.
But, like, really having another person to kind of understand what it is to, like, to go through things is, like, it's really helpful. And just, you know, that's part of the reason why I come on and I tell my story on these platforms, is because I want people to know that they're not alone. Right? There is hope. There are ways to heal. There are ways you can make it through it. You know, it's like, you are important on this world, this planet. You know, there is a place for you. It's just, it's just we have to find our own way and our own path, which is often not the normal way, right? Not the way that's conditioned to us by society or what we're told by our parents and stuff. We're feeling our own way through and making the best of whatever we have, and learning to appreciate life, I guess, in the small stuff.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what my podcast represents. Absolutely. So that's why I'm like, oh, she understands.
I understand.
Because I do want people to know that they are never alone, and that there are people that care about them, and that they are important, and that their life does serve a purpose. They may not know what that purpose is or what path is on. I had an interview just the other day about how the initial path you want may not be the path you stick to, and that's completely okay. Just to give you a little more insight into who I am, I thought my purpose, because I'm a Christian, so that's my own belief system and prerogative. I thought my initial path / purpose was to be a youth pastor. I love helping others, and when it comes to giving advice, I usually add my Christian principles when giving them. So why not go full circle and actually use that to help the youth of today? because youth is what's important. But my path and purpose completely changed. I didn't think my purpose could change, but it did. And now I'm using my love of graphic arts because I'm a digital art student, and finding a way to utilize that particular skill set to help, hopefully in the future, I'm still in school, hopefully in the future help nonprofit organizations and other advertising related businesses, and use my graphics to perhaps raise awareness for others or help others. I'm pretty sure there's many facets to how that particular skill set can be used. So I can still, even though my path may have changed, I can still use the path that I'm currently on to help others. And that's really my overall vision in my life, is to help others. That will never change. And that's also probably why this podcast began. If my path hadn't changed, then this podcast wouldn't have been possible. So
yeah, that's so beautiful. You have such a beautiful heart. It's lovely.
thank you.
So
So you did mention being a pleasure and a life coach. Now, is that still part of your field, or was that one of your previous fields?
no, well, I kind of I kind of draw on everything really, like you were saying. You have this. I mean, I was like way off my path. I was like a sales rep in corporate. That is so not me. I'm like a highly sensitive, intuitive, like energy worker basically. And so I was like, life was like, no, no, and I kept getting these messages like, you're a medicine woman, you're a shaman. I was like, no, not doing it. I was like, how am I supposed to go from there? And then life was like, poof. If you don't listen to spirit, you don't listen to God, then you get a sledgehammer hit, don't you? And you're just like, okay. So like, and now, I kind of use my skills and stuff in terms of to be able to help people, to help people who are struggling, who are in pain, to move into a more kind of easeful life, to come to a sense of like acceptance and stuff of themselves and where they are. So I don't know what I would call myself really in terms of, I guess I call myself an ease expert, as that's been my path kind of from struggle to finding like ease and grace and beauty in my life. And I use different modalities. Some of it's like energy stuff, some of it's shamanic stuff, some of it's like pleasure coaching, through the body. And I work a lot with, I think one of the things is that we can become so identified like with these parts of ourselves that we think that they are. So for me, for example, I was really identified with the part that was in pain. And I was really identified with the part that hated the pain. And these are not who I am. These were just like younger childhood parts that I hadn't yet kind of accepted and welcomed into myself. And it sounds really weird when you say to someone, oh, that's really interesting. How old is this part of you? And they're like, what? And you're like, no, your whole face shape just changed. Everything just kind of moved. Your voice kind of went really young. And I was like, how old is this part of you? And they're so identified with these parts that they don't actually know that's not who they are. Like these parts of us have like very limited kind of perspectives on the world. So they tend to see things in narrow kind of ways. And when you start to begin to kind of really work with these parts and integrate them back into the wholeness, back into the whole of who you are, that's when life really begins to kind of change and becomes easy. So that's part of the work that I do with clients. And I do a lot of, connecting with nature and stuff, because that's been so healing for me, being in trees, getting my feet on the earth. I live by the beach, which is amazing. I get to go like walking by the sea kind of every day. And then a lot of kind of energy work. There are lots of conditioning layers around like how, we're very kind of capitalist society in terms of like work hard, must work hard. So it's at least like my generation seem to have kind of still kind of carry that. And so it's a lot of kind of, removing old layers of conditioning and just really opening people up into possibilities and to be able to live a life that they want to live, maybe than, the life that they were given. And not everybody has. I mean, I think like any form of illness or anything is an invitation, isn't it? Is an invitation into deeper levels of love or levels of acceptance, or to things in your life that aren't working, or there are things in your life that you haven't accepted and haven't kind of dealt with.
Right. And not just to illness specifically. I mean, honestly, I emphasize mental health and the whole myriad of problems that encompasses that. But obviously, this particular topic can pertain to anyone trying to figure out who they are and how to best find that out. Considering the pandemic and the unfortunate negativity it has brought on our world, how do you think people have, or in your professional or personal opinion, you can choose to answer it both ways. How do you feel people have been affected by it, as far as obviously everything was put on pause? Do you think it has sort of given people an opportunity to reflect and discover more about who they are, or do you find it's been a slightly difficult considering everything is so isolated?
I think it's, to me, or from my experience, it's been kind of multifactorial. There's been some like real great fundamental realizations of people that are like, in order to thrive, we need to be in community of like-minded people who care and who love and support us. We need to care for each other. We need to kind of care for the planet. Life as it was not really working. And I think one of the big lessons I think it taught us is, as human beings, we think we have control because there's these illusion of these like structures and stuff in place, and then it just takes one little virus or one natural whatever it is, and then like the whole of the world got disrupted by this. It's like it was so unpredictable on one levels, but then if you listen to the shamans in the Andes, they've been predicting this for generations. They didn't say exactly what it was, but this type of worldwide event that nobody escaped it, really, did they? It kind of affected everybody. And I guess in depends how you look at it, really. You can look at it as an opportunity, or you could look at it as like I think it's been really difficult. I found it hard at times, and I've also found it really beautiful as well. So, and I think if there's any form of unresolved trauma or stuff in your system, like what's happened will have activated it. So on that level, it's been really hard for people. I found, when COVID kind of hit off, it really hit a new layer of stuff that I hadn't dealt with, brought up lots of fear and stuff and anxiety. But then the blessing was that, of working my way through it, to be free from that, to realize it was just old childhood stuff that was getting triggered inside of my nervous system. So in some ways, it's like it's been a journey through COVID, but I kind of feel like for me, it's been in many ways a real blessing. And there's also been a lot of kind of energy movements in the collective as well. There's been a lot of fear and anxiety, and of course grief. Lots of people have lost people that they loved and that they cared for. They know someone, and that's incredibly difficult. So I don't want to brush past that as well. That needs a place of like honoring, and there's been a lot of financial difficulties for people as well, but then there's also been a lot of financial opportunities for other people. It's a really interesting.
I completely agree that there has been some negative ramification in regards to this pandemic, perhaps more negative than good, depending on your perspective. I've obviously seen the blessing and perspective from it. People really hate 2020, and I can completely understand that.
You won't forget it, right? You'll be like, oh, I remember what we were doing in 2020.
Right. But for myself, I can't really hate 2020. There, after obviously me sharing my story a bit about you a few short seconds ago, there was a really likely chance of me not being able to witness 2020. So
I can't imagine that. How did it change you? Like, that must have really changed.
It was a really huge change that I didn't foresee coming. As I mentioned, I had many health issues growing up. Just to give you, I guess, more insight, because I've made it a point to make this more known, because it's a part of my story that I don't really share enough. For the first 2 years of my life, I couldn't hear or talk. Um, yes, that tends to shock
That's a
a lot of,
lot.
that tends to shock a lot of people because you're talking now, so how on earth is that possible? But it's the absolute truth, and it's a part of my story. So of
Did
course,
you have a difficult birth or?
um there's more parts to my particular birth story that I'm not gonna get too much
Okay.
into, but yeah, that's so considering what I just shared, and obviously I had other health issues pertaining to what I just shared at my birth. To have to go from your life being completely at a good point to now being diagnosed with diabetes, as you can imagine now, knowing furthermore into who I am, this was very, very difficult for my family to process. But for me, I could have died. That was a really sad, hard reality. It's probably the most depressing point in my life. I don't think I've ever had a more depressing point. I mean, I felt rejection, insecurities, and all types of emotional issues, and not having any friends and being alone. But this by far was the most depressed I've ever been in my life, because just the sheer thought of knowing that I really could have died at any given moment was just absolutely terrifying. So the fact that I was able to witness 2020 was just a blessing automatically, regardless of the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic, because I could have not witnessed it. I could not be here. So I did see my diagnosis as a blessing, but it was really hard for me to process. The only person I knew who had a history of diabetes was my best friend, Sandra. I've been best friends with her since I was like 4, so we're friends, still friends to this day. So she was a real anchor in trying to help me understand this new chapter of my life that's pretty much going to be a part of my whole life for as long as I can know at this point. So she was a real anchor in helping me figure this out. It was a lot for me to process. I didn't really share it to anyone whatsoever. I waited till March to really discuss it, because even though I've accepted the fact that it's a blessing in disguise that this occurred to me, and yay, I can still live my life and I don't have to die, but it was still very overwhelming, and I didn't want to put that in my mindset. It would feel like a burden if I shared that with anybody at that time. Although my family's like understanding and my friends love me and the awesomest people on the planet, but where my mind was at, I couldn't like unleash that on them. It was hard enough for my own family to even process the fact that this was now part of my life. How can I expect anybody else to understand? So and I will say this, when the shut down, I don't know where you're.
I'm in England, so we have different lockdown rules to you.
Right.
You're in the US.
Yes, I'm right here in Florida. When the quarantine or shutdown occurred here in March of last year, I'm getting
it's been a long time, hasn't it? Really,
for a year now. March came. I guess I'll give you more further insight. The first week of March, I finally felt like myself again. I've adjusted to this news that this is a part of my life. My blood sugar was under control because I had to get accustomed to insulin injecting myself, and the fact that hey, I was probably diabetic for several months before I was diagnosed, so I have to keep. But obviously, I had no idea. I have to make sure my body stays alive and breathing. So after I finally got accustomed to it, I opted to, when I decided not to tell anybody, I literally went to the extreme of not telling anybody and basically social distanced from everyone. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
just to give you another idea, I would go outside the house and my blood sugar would be like sky high. Like, yeah, I'm not going out. Like, I this is still new to me. So the fact that my blood sugar is high when I go out makes me not want to go out. So once March came, which would be the first week of March or so, everything seemed under control. This is part of my life. I'm still here. Yay. So I decided to go out for the first time since the news. I had diagnosed in January, February. This was like 2 months of having processed this news pretty much. I went out once. I remember it clear as day because it was a friend's birthday party. I went out once, still a little hesitant because I was diabetic and this was a birthday party, so it's not like I could have cake.
Yeah, that's true.
Or at least not like an actual slice. I can probably have like an ant-sized bite of cake, literally. So I went out once, and then I believe it was probably the following week. It wasn't that quick till that long after that the world was being quarantined and shut down. So I hadn't been social in months. Keep me in mind, November, I was sick, just turned 24. I could have died. I get diagnosed. Still out to process. I go out in March, I finally feel like myself again, and then bam, the world decides to be in freaking lockdown. So that was really hard for me because I hadn't been social in months.
Oh no, so you've had a really long, a long lockdown.
Yes, so the fact that the world decided to go on lockdown wasn't really easy for me. Like, I do admit I needed that socialization, and being diabetic and when this news was really difficult. I did take a break of school. I did not continue my schooling once I found out I was diabetic. Also, I passed my classes while I was sick somehow, just to give you more insight.
Amazing.
So it was really difficult, the beginning of the shutdown. Because I had been social distancing really from everyone before that became public knowledge to even do. So it was really, really difficult. But luckily, Zoom was a really fundamental factor to helping with that. And my the church I'm a part of down here in Florida decided to do young adult Zoom sessions. So I still had that sense of community that I desperately needed. And they were really helpful because I was still newly diabetic. This was part of my life. My emotions were out of whack, and the quarantine now didn't help with that because now I'm finally comfortable and okay with being myself and going out, but now I really can't go out and I have to stay home when I've been home for like months. So it wasn't easy, the first start of the pandemic for me. Even though my diagnosis was a blessing, I still think of it as a blessing. The mental state and the emotions wasn't easy, but just to give you further insight, and I'm trying not to make this an hour-long episode, but when it comes to my podcast, there's no time constraints, but I do have another interview in a little bit, so I'll try to keep it. When the news of the quarantine and the shutdown hit, I was absolutely terrified because having been on the brink of death really not that long ago when the shutdown occurred, like 2-3 months prior. And to have the knowledge of the sheer fact that this virus, we didn't have a vaccine yet, obviously, could kill you was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it makes it, when you've got like a chronic health thing or a long-term health thing, something that is terrifying anyway, it makes it really, really stressful, doesn't it?
Right. It didn't make my chances any easier because I was diabetic and had the asymptomatic and all those other health-related conditions. So my survival rating was very low to the typical human. So to go from the idea of on the brink of death to now having this virus that can potentially kill you a lot quicker because of my diagnosis was absolutely terrifying. And it was horrible because I'm like, okay, I already went through the concept of possibly dying already. I don't want to have to end up in the hospital again and die. So that's just a little insight into how I was the beginning of the pandemic. But
thank you for sharing. Yeah.
in the overall spectrum of the pandemic as a whole, I can understand people's anxiety and their emotions and being quarantined and isolated, but it has brought on self-reflection and opportunity, as you eloquently put it, in regards to businesses. And it really helped foster this podcast pretty much because I understand people going through a difficult time right now and their emotions and not understanding what's going on. So this whole podcast is a real source of comfort, just a virtual hug, so to speak, or audio hug, however that works. Plus I love giving hugs, so that's the best metaphor to give.
I know, right? I can't wait. Yeah, hugging people again is like, oh.
So, just a nice little reminder of love and hugs for people during this unfortunate time, and that there are people that care about you. And if I can help make your day a little more bearable or bring a smile to your face through this awesome podcast, then that's what I'm going to do. So,
yeah, it's just, I think one of the things that I found is that's really important is one, to have community, right? Community of like-minded people for like love and connection and support. And also it's like that feeling of like not being alone, that other people understand how difficult it is, all of the mental kind of stuff that can arise and go on. And then there's also like, I think it's really important to have hope, right? That hope that that you will make it through this. You're strong enough to make it through this, even if you think that you're not. You are. You will make it through. And I think that's one of the fundamental beauty, actually, of the human spirit, is that we're very resilient. Like, we will always make it through.
Absolutely. So I do have my icebreaker question. It took a long time to get to this icebreaker question, but like I said, when it comes to my podcast, speaking from the heart, it's pretty much a given. So my listeners will understand. If you could have any superpower that's not flying or teleporting, many people pick those teleporting when I say they can't pick flying. I understand people miss traveling and flying would be a wonderful construct, but it's too easy an answer to go to, and teleporting and flying is the exact same thing. So if you could have any superpower that's not flying or teleporting, what would it be?
Oh, what would my superpower be?
Feel free to have some fun with it. Many people enjoy this question.
I think my superpower, if I could have one, would be like everyone I meet or everyone I came in contact with or life who's touched, I would just want them to have an experience of what it is like to feel totally loved, totally held, totally supported, and totally accepted for who that they are. That would be my kind of that would be my superpower.
That would be a good power.
Yeah, well, love's really important to me.
Positivity into their mind. I
think
that.
that's the whole point in being alive, right? It's love, like to give love, to receive love, to feel love. That's fundamentally, I think, the point of being human. To love.
Absolutely. So my power, it's not exactly a power, but I feel like it would be one in the future, would be the power for this podcast to be heard across other galaxies that have yet to be discovered. They're not even discovered yet.
exciting. I love a bit of multi-dimensional action.
Yes, intergalactic broadcasting from like Pluto. I believe that's the farthest planet. There's probably another planet out there I don't even know of that's listening right now. So, yes. Well, Claire, we can keep this conversation going all night long, but you have an awesome beach to explore, which I'm insanely jealous of. And I have to get back to the rest of my day as well. So we're at the end of this awesome conversation. Do you have any social plugins or websites? Give my listeners the inside scoop to how they can get in touch with you.
So the best ways to get in contact with me are like social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And I'm on as Claire Moorcraft. So that's CLAIRE, and my surname is MOORCRAFT. So Claire Moorcraft. Just kind of search my name there. You'll see me. Probably. I think there might be another Claire Moorcraft on Facebook, but I'm the only one that says Ease Expert, and there's lots of pictures probably of me there in gold because, you know, one day I decided it would be a really good idea to, like, you know, paint myself solely in gold and have my photographs taken. It's just one of those things that I always wanted to do. And then that was one of the blessings of the pandemic, because I was kind of putting it off, and my friend who was a photographer was like, if you want to do it, you have to do it tomorrow, otherwise we're not going to do it. So I was like, okay. Otherwise they may not have happened. So that's a good sign. That's a good way to tell it was me.
I'm sure that profile really does. That's so cool.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you, Claire, for joining me today. This was a really awesome conversation.
Yes, thank you. I love talking with you and your heart, and yeah, just blessings and love to your readers and to you, or I should say readers, listeners, I should say. Readers, listeners?
I mean, I don't have a script when it comes to this, so if you want to say readers, I mean, maybe they're listening to it through their minds and reading it in their minds. I don't really know the whole construct of the mind. It has unlimited possibilities when it comes to how people perceive this podcast, but
reading sound. That's a new one.
Either way, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, lovely.
Awesome. To all my listeners who, however you are listening to this, stay healthy, stay safe, and until next time. Bye.